Hey everyone, welcome back to the 6.5 Summit. I'm Daniel Newman, one of the hosts here at the 6.5. We are in day one. It is the cloud and infrastructure track, and I'm very excited for our next session. I've got Derek Dicker. He is the CEO of Nyriad. Derek, welcome. First time on the 6.5. I've wanted you here for a long time. Thanks for letting me get you out here. A lot to talk about.
It's a pleasure to be here, Daniel. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, we've had a really big couple of months around infrastructure. Everybody's eyes are on AI, and we've got our AI track going as well. But look, the picks and shovels and axes of infrastructure come down to things like compute and network and storage, and we're seeing this massive tailwind that's coming. We can't inference data we can't access, so it makes the data management and storage components super important. And that's really what I want to spend some time with you talking today, is driving business outcomes with GPU accelerated storage, and really just talking about this whole role that storage has to play in the future of an AI accelerated world. It's going to be an interesting conversation. So let's get right into it. Let's start with just kind of your overall observations about the storage market.
Fantastic. Really appreciate it. And I agree with you. I think it's an incredibly exciting time right now. I'd say that, the first kind of foundational theme that we observe is the fact that data generation continues to grow in leaps and leaps and bounds. I was just looking at some data the other day that essentially suggested that data generation is sitting on the order last year of 100 zettabytes. Now, a zettabyte is 1,000,000 petabytes. That's a whole lot of data that's being generated. Of that, more than half of it is coming out of the enterprise. So businesses that are off turning the crank on generative AI and other very, very intriguing workloads are ending up generating that. And then of that, 80% of it is unstructured data. So we have this amazing set of secular trends just in the last year tipping over into 100 zettabytes of data generation. It's expected to grow by a factor of 2 or 3 over time. So, that data has to be, some chunk of it has to be stored. So that's a first piece that's particularly exciting to us, especially as we play in the storage space here at Nyriad. I think the other thing that we're finding interesting is that there's this interesting expansion of the hybrid cloud. So a number of different workloads transition into the cloud. It's surprising to me in a few cases where we're getting kind of this increasing level of noise around, hey, you know what, we actually love the cloud, but there's portions of workloads that we think are better suited on-prem, and we want to deploy more and more in earnest around hybrid cloud. So that's another trend that actually lends itself very well to the growth in the on-prem space, which hasn't seen a ton of growth in the recent past. But the other couple of things that we're also seeing, Daniel, is customers are very much interested in the what and the how that they're procuring. So what's the cost of the storage that they're paying for? You mentioned the theme is navigating rough waters with practical innovation. Those rough waters translate into having to make some difficult decisions to make sure that the business outcomes are generating a positive ROI. The how, interestingly enough, if I look back in my time in storage, there's been a lot of focus on capital purchases historically. People write big checks, and those big checks come in the form of buying equipment as well as service infrastructure and maintenance agreements. But what's increasingly happened, we're seeing, is customers like the cloud model in the sense they want to write a check deterministically every month for a set of services. And they're not necessarily so interested in these big lumpy expenses. And storage as a service has emerged. So that's been of interest to us too.
Yeah, they want to be able to ramp up, ramp down, add capacity, remove, add features and functionality and flexibility. Yeah, I think you hit on a lot of really interesting trend lines there. And I do think that data volume explosion is only going to see exponential growth in the era of AI and generative AI. I mean, look, 6-7 months ago, none of us had even really used the expression, whether we understood what it was, of generative AI. Now we're hearing, and of course, this means not just in the data center, but this is going to be on devices. This is going to be at the edge. This is going to happen everywhere. And that's going to mean we're going to need to store all this data and make it really accessible. We also saw the crazy demand for GPUs. And this, of course, a lot of people are thinking about it in the context of compute and acceleration for training and workloads, and eventually for inference. But I thought it was really interesting is that, you guys are looking at GPUs being used for storage.
Yep.
Talk to me about how you landed there.
Happy to. It's an interesting story. So the CTO of the company, Dr. Stu Inglis, he's a very interesting individual in the sense that he's a PhD in machine learning, but he's a data center operator and manager by background and trade. He's also a prolific contributor to the Linux community. But in the context of his data center role, one of the things that always bothered him, that created concern for him, was that he had a number of friends that were sysadmins, and those sysadmins would get calls in the middle of the night to do some pretty unfortunate things. One of them in particular was servicing drives that were failing. Hard disk drives do tend to fail. And in RAID-based arrays, the challenge is if you get to a couple of drives failing, you're one drive away from losing your data. So you're either spending a lot of extra money to have separate capacity set aside, or alternatively, you're deploying people to go service them. He looked at it and said, there's got to be a different way. And when he did, he was also looking at a fairly large deployment that the company was participating in that involved large-scale storage. It involved needing to place this storage in a rather rural area. And as a result, it needed to be able to be easily maintained. When he looked at RAID as a core architecture, which is what most of the on-prem storage providers today use, he concluded that wasn't going to cut the job. That wasn't going to get the job done. And erasure coding was a technique that existed broadly. Now, the thing that's unique about erasure coding at the time is it was done fairly regularly, calculated on x86 CPUs. And it was expensive. And the innovation that he applied to this, he says, look, we like the dynamics of erasure coding because you can do things like dial up the number of drives that fail. It doesn't have to be just 2. It can be 10. It can be 20 in an array. But these CPUs are really expensive. What if we actually chose to erasure code, not at the file level like everybody else is doing on x86 CPUs, but at the block level? And to do it in a GPU, where the beauty of a GPU, as we're all becoming educated on now for the reasons you mentioned, is these are massively parallel compute engines. And erasure coding lends itself to that. So he took that idea and he said, all right, let's build a system. Let's put a GPU in and a CPU in. We call it a combined processor architecture. Let's run erasure coding at the block level, and then let's intelligently place that data in the system. And what Nyriad came up with, was essentially a system that's super high performance for the target workloads that we're going after. It's got incredible resiliency. You can dial up, a customer can decide, do they want to protect 10 drives, 20 drives of failure simultaneously? But the key is that we maintain performance into that system when those drives fail. And that's a unique differentiator too. So it really was somebody trying to solve a problem for his buddies who were sysadmins at the very beginning.
So Derek, it's a great story. All the best companies have good stories. And I'll tell you that I like the fact that there was a problem that was identified. There's lots of companies offering storage. Some people, when you announce, oh, we're going to build a storage, they're like, yeah, okay, we need more storage, right? I mean, it feels like between the hyperscale cloud and then all the long-term players in storage, like maybe there's enough. But you've identified a gap, and that's what was really interesting and what attracted me to Nyriad. But I'll be honest with you, you got a little geeky there, and so we've got an audience that are definitely technical here at the 6.5 Summit. We also have an audience of business people, and I think the adoption of Nyriad is going to be a combination of both those sysadmin, and those folks that are like, hey, we got a problem, but it's also the business saying, they're going to solve it with a way that actually is, been designed and developed to give us what we need. And that's been an enabler of you guys winning deals. So talk a little bit about how this, approach is driving innovation that, is leading to customer wins for Nyriad.
Happy to do that. So, the way I would start out is just to explain that the product itself is called UltraIO. The way to think of it is we start in about a petabyte scale. So these are large scale systems. And we tend to find that the sweet spot for these products are in the HPC space, media and entertainment, backup and recovery, and active archive workloads. So we're pretty specific about where we play. And the rationale behind that is that the system is actually really, really good performance-wise with workloads that tend to lend themselves in the sequential domain. So if you think of video storage, if you think of imagery storage, if you think of some of these large compute problems in the HPC space where people are attempting to derive insights out of large amounts of data, that's where we play. Now, the first maybe example that I'll give you, going back to the business outcome side of things, as you highlighted, is essentially a creative digital marketing shop by the name of Digital Image. Digital Image had a very interesting challenge in that they were running a small team of editors who ended up having a storage subsystem that was designed out of 3 different storage systems that were not, let's just say, built together and optimized for the purposes of getting the work done that they needed. And coming on the heels of that, what they came to us and said was, look, we want to be able to avoid a very specific problem. Our problem is that we store all our data in one array, but we need to get files across to our editors in the media editing rooms. And the challenge is today we create proxy copies. We have to run this process that essentially downsamples, brings these things onto the network, moves them over to the editors, and the editors have to go to work on them. Out of that, we landed on, I think we can help you. We delivered a single UltraIO. We displaced the 3 systems that they had there. And essentially their editors could now edit in line on the box itself. No more proxy copies, no more lost time. And the data point that they gave us in the case study that we've published is essentially that we've saved them, an average project for them is 7-8 days. We've saved them approximately 2 to 2.5 days per project. That's huge benefit for them. Now they can actually use that cycle time for other projects. They have all kinds of freedom and flexibility associated with it. So that's the first one.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say maybe just the next two, just to finish it out. Top 10 university here in the United States came to us and they basically said, look, we have a large number of cameras that exist around our different sites, and each one of them has a different application that's running it and different dedicated storage. We would love to be able to simplify that. Is that something that you can help us with? Where we've landed is actually we've deployed a couple of systems now. One for a primary location to take receipt of all of those cameras on a particular application, and then a replication site. Now, in addition to that, as they started to play with the technology and saw the performance and looked at the ability to consolidate multiple applications, going back to navigating difficult times, wanting efficiencies out of their operations, they decided that they also wanted to put an e-learning platform on top of that same system. And so now they're deploying an e-learning platform that has thousands of students that can utilize it in addition to the video work. So being able to take multiple applications and consolidate them on a single system. And then the last one that I'll highlight, we recently announced, we're very pleased to say that Trinity Broadcasting Networks is a user of UltraIO. They essentially selected us to be the foundational provider of editorial and media asset management environment storage for them. So just a few examples to explain how people are leveraging the technology to add value in their system.
Well, if listening to you, I hear a couple of themes too. One of the themes and really appropriate for this year's 6.5 Summit is about, the navigating rough waters is about, efficiency. So a lot of companies, right, kind of when the boom is on, everyone's just spend. We need more storage, spin up more storage, buy more hardware. Let's just keep going. And I think what it sounds like in these customer wins that you're getting is that you're kind of getting underneath and finding that there are some, meaningful deficiencies in certain workloads and types of workloads that Nyriad is uniquely prepared to help. And in the process, some efficiency is being found, right? Less redundancy, less additional hardware, less downtime. Time is money, as is hardware is money. So I'm hearing that across your examples, which I think generally is the way you make a market for a new product, which is good. I also think, something you said that kind of, nicely rolls into the next question is, all this GPU adoption is a power, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, look, GPUs are incredibly capable for these certain types of workloads, including the ones that you've mentioned. They're also power hogs, and it's a fairly well-known thing. So if you can get more done with less, that's really an important opportunity. Sustainability is on every company's mind. You're seeing almost every company on the planet's putting out a sustainability initiative or some sort of, documentation to show what they're doing to be more sustainable. In terms of, in the context of storage, when you talk about this efficiency, is Nyriad thinking about sustainability as part of its strategy? Can you help companies use less power while still being able to get the compute and the productivity they require?
Yeah, absolutely we can, Daniel. And the notion of practical innovation as part of the theme for the show kind of strikes me as relevant in this discussion. I mentioned to you earlier that instead of using RAID as an underlying data protection technology, we use something called erasure coding. The unique thing about erasure coding is that it affords us the ability to use large drives, large capacity hard disk drives in our systems. What's unique about that is that as opposed to what's used traditionally in on-prem, which is RAID-based technology, the RAID technology forces customers to consider using smaller capacity drives in every drive slot. The reason for that's very simple. When a drive fails, the rebuild time has a correlation to how large that drive is typically. So using smaller drives reduces the amount of time you need to spend rebuilding a drive, which comes with degraded state in classic systems. What we've done, because we use erasure coding and we do it at the block level, we can use these large drives. Now, what people don't realize is that there's a fundamental power consumption difference between a large capacity drive and what I would describe as a smaller capacity drive. And just to give you an example, an 8 terabyte drive sits a little north of 8 watts of consumption, and an 18 sits around 7. That just has to do with innovation and how innovation has occurred over time. You take 2 8s and you essentially get north of 16 watts. That's 2 drive slots occupied versus a single 18 at 7. That's a massive delta. And then you multiply it across a large scale storage system. So if you get upwards, the math we did, if you get upwards of, call it almost 3 petabytes of a capacity in a storage system, you can see that you can actually deliver something that's 1/3 the carbon footprint of a system built on these smaller capacity drives. So it matters. Architecture matters, and innovation, of course, matters. And we're seeing interest on behalf of customers in that.
And to kind of further your point, though, is everything you're saying you have to think about with kind of an exponential mindset.
Yeah.
So, right, the compute being deployed, it's not like, oh, there's a couple of GPUs. When you look at compute, there's a cluster, it might be 10,000 GPUs. It might be 64,000 GPUs, that are being clustered together. And obviously there's a correlating amount of storage and memory and networking required to do all these things, all of which is using power. Something like 1% to 2% of the world's power right now is being consumed in data centers. The onset of, this data explosion, generative AI is only going to make that number higher, which really does put it on us as the technology industry as needing to take a leadership role in figuring out how to continue to get all this productivity and all these gains and all this, democratization of information while still being sensitive to the needs for being more sustainable and taking care of the planet. By the way, we got a whole session here at the 6.5 Summit about sustainability. Check that out after you finish watching me here talking with Derek. All right, so let's kind of wrap this up. Nyriad's not a household name yet, but clearly you're starting to win some really prominent accounts, in media, in education, across different big industries. Derek, talk a little bit about kind of, how and what are the drivers of customers to come over, and kind of how you want the customers to continue to learn more and figuring out those right applications to start engaging with Nyriad.
Well, I think, first off, it starts with, an interest in large scale storage with high performance, awesome reliability, and efficiency. Those 3 tenets seem to be the characteristics of the opportunities that we add a ton of value in. And those 4 markets that I talked about, HPC, media and entertainment, backup and recovery, and active archive, all of them lend themselves really well to the products that we've built. That's essentially the core of where we're operating today. And, we've been really blessed to engage with a number, like you said, of leaders in the industry to demonstrate that. And we're just getting rolling. We're looking forward to the next many quarters moving forward of designs that we can announce and products and customers that we're winning with.
Well, I'm excited to watch the continued development of the company. Like I said, there's a reason I got behind it personally as an investor. And I think it's going to be a very interesting company to continue to watch this area. And with GPUs and AI and all this convergence, I wonder if you're going to be a trendsetter here in this particular space. I think it could be, but I'm a little biased. But Derek, I want to thank you so much. First time on the 6.5, joining us for this year's 6.5 Summit, our biggest summit yet. Thanks for joining us. Let's have you back soon.
Thank you. Look forward to it, Daniel. Really appreciate it.
All right, everyone. There you have it. That was Derek Dicker, CEO of Nyriad. It's day one here. We're in the cloud and infrastructure track. We appreciate you tuning in. All of our sessions are available on demand, so we hope you will join us for those, but also stay with us live, share these out with your friends, subscribe to all the great 6.5 content. I got to go for now, but we'll see you in another session really soon.